Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I am Elizabeth, the events coordinator for Gibson's Bookstore and your host for this virtual event. We are here this evening to celebrate the new launch of poet Kyle Potvin's first full-length poetry collection, Loosen, which is published by our friends at the New Hampshire-based independent press of Hobblebush. Now, she is joined in conversation this evening by her friend and fellow Hobblebush Press poet, Maudelle Driskell. Maudelle Driskell holds an MFA in poetry from Warren Wilson College. Her work has been published in many literary reviews and anthologies. She is the recipient of the Ruth Lilly Fellowship awarded by Poetry and the Modern Language Association. Her poetry collection, Talismans, is available from Hobblebush Books and Gibson's Bookstore. Raised in South Georgia, Driskell lived most of her adult life in Atlanta. She now lives in Bethlehem, New Hampshire, where she is the executive director of The Frost Place, an arts organization headquartered in Robert Frost's historic home. The Frost Place is also currently planning a series of virtual poetry readings for this summer, which will be announced in April, the schedule of that. So do check out their website for more information in the coming weeks. Kyle's book is available from Gibson's Bookstore. We are happy to hook you up with a signed copy. We offer shipping, curbside pickup, or in-store browsing. Thank you, both of you, for joining us this evening. Maudelle, won't you please take it away?
I'd love to. First, let me tell everyone that if I'm tilting my head like a goose, I am new to bifocals. So I'll try to, I've adjusted my volume up as much as I can. And I'm coming to you from South Georgia on my family's farm. It's really a wonderful thing to be with you here tonight with Kyle on this amazing first collection, a fellow Hobblebush author, and to have this event sponsored by Gibson's Bookstore. So thank you once again, Gibson's, for that. Loosen from Hobblebush Books is Kyle Potvin's debut full-length poetry collection. Her chapbook, Sound Travels on Water by Finishing Line Press, won the Jean Petrick Chapbook Award. She's a two-time finalist for the Howard Nemerov Sonnet Award. Her poems have appeared in Bellevue Literary Review, Tar River Poetry, Whale Road Review, Echo Tone, the New York Times, and others. Kyle's co-founder with Tammy True of the Prickly Pear Poetry Project, Processing the Cancer Experience Through Poetry, a workshop for survivors and caregivers. She's advisor to the Frost Farm Poetry in Derry, New Hampshire, and served as assistant director of the New Hampshire Poetry Festival for 5 years. Kyle runs a public relations firm and lives with her husband and 2 sons in southern New Hampshire. As a longtime student and lover of poetry, I can tell you that one of the best things about poetry and what makes it strong and chilling to the bone, as Emily Dickinson says, is truth in words and action. Kyle's poems in Loosen give you that truth and are crafted from sonnet to free verse. The images, the rhymes, and the forms weave through the book an overarching narrative that's enlivened by tremendous images and wonderful observations on life. Loosen itself, with its hierarchical narrative arranged around a life torn by cancer and observations and deepenings that are given by cancer, and just everyday human life, really holds together as both a single project and a wonderful collection of poems. It's a real pleasure to be able to introduce this book to the poetry community at large, and to tell you that I envy you its first reading. Kyle?
Maudelle, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I'm so happy to have you here on this day, and to my friends at Gibson's Bookstore, so happy to be able to launch the book here. So thank you so much. And really, truly, a big thanks to Hobblebush Books. The team there, Kirsty Walker and Sid Hall and Roger Martin, were just so important in making this book even better, every step of the way. So I appreciate that so much. And really appreciate you all for coming. This is so overwhelming to hear from you. I wish I could see you. I know we always talk about, being in person for these kinds of launches, and we can hug and drink some wine. But, this virtual atmosphere is great too, because people can join from all over. So thank you so much. This collection has been a long time coming in an embarrassing way, about 15 years. And because of that, I feel like it's been a real collaboration with so many people, all my workshop buddies and poets that I've met through conferences, and my editors and everyone have really been a part of this book, and I appreciate all their help. I do want to extend a big thank you to Brenda Wilbert, who is the one who designed this beautiful artwork that's behind me and is on the cover of Lucin. We met through a project by the then Poet Laureate of New Hampshire, Alice Fogel, and it was an ekphrastic poetry and art project. And we were matched up, and this is the painting that Brenda did, and it inspired the title poem. So thank you, Brenda. And I would like to thank Alice for her generous words for the cover, as well as Linda Paston, who is somebody that I have admired and been inspired by for so many years. And also Lee Brissetti, who not only is a terrific poet, but in a weird twist of fate, is also the sister of my wonderful oncologist, Fred Brissetti. So all of these things come together in this book, and so it makes it very meaningful for me. And then just a final shout out to my husband, Glenn, and my boys, Jack and Jeff, who always encourage their resident poet. So over to you, Maudelle.
Thanks, Kyle. Working through this, Kyle, I thought it would be interesting to talk about the sections of the book and ask a couple of questions and have her illustrate by reading poems. The first section that we wanted to talk about centers around cancer. And as all of you probably know, cancer is from cells that reproduce and change slightly. When they change, they become something other than what they were to begin with, which I guess is the essence of change, but they can cause changes within the body. And those changes change the heart and the mind, the way that you look at the future. I thought it would be really interesting to have Kyle tell us just a little bit of how cancer shaped her poetry and her poetry life.
Yeah, and it's a great question. When I was first diagnosed with breast cancer, and that was back in 2006, I found a lot of solace in reading cancer poetry. So Jane Kenyon was my go-to. She's a New Hampshire poet with a national reputation who had leukemia and died in her 40s. You'll see a couple of references to her actually in my book. But I found that reading it was a big part of kind of getting through that whole stage. But I also found myself writing a lot of cancer poems, not by intent, but they just kept popping up. Loss and mortality are pretty common themes in my work anyway. So it almost became a metaphor. Cancer became a metaphor and a different way to tell that story. And so it just kind of evolved. I guess as every experience came, it would lead to new ideas, new thoughts. And then even when I was done with my treatment, feeling great, then, there were my friends that were lost to cancer. So there was like a whole new cycle of different ways of looking at these things.
Would you read something for us, Kyle?
Yes. I'll read two poems with cancer themes. The first one is called Coyote Fruit. On a beach in Brazil, sipping capareinas, sweet and sour, slipping down my throat, it's all I can do not to stare at breasts, round and perfect like those on last night's samba dancers. On the streets, the produce stalls are vibrant with cabbages and beets, rutabagas and tomatoes. My fingers explore each sphere. A coyote fruit with bumpy skin sends my mind where it shouldn't go, and I draw my hand to my chest. At the next stall, a man with a machete cleaves a coconut, removes a useless piece, offers me milk from its shell. Rogue wave. Last week we stood on opposite coasts. On the Florida side, waves ran at my feet, snatching bits of sand from underneath, persistent as the land-grabbing cells inside me. I wondered how long I could stand before, unbalanced, I'd float away, buoyant and hollow, empty as a jellyfish. And you, a continent away, I imagine your last thoughts, chicken for dinner, this awful cold. Before trying to save your dog, you were swept away by the rough Pacific. Back home, I stand, sand still draining through my hourglass toes. And I wonder, Molly, was it a relief to be taken without notice?
That was wonderful, Kyle. One of my teachers, David Bottoms, told us often that it was an irony that suffering brings us closer than love. One of the things I think about suffering is that it is something that we all experience. And through that shared experience, even if it is not the same particular interest, we're able to tap in to the continuous line of humanity and to feel closer in that way. And I think those poems really do that. For cancer or not cancer, looking into suffering and sorrow and saying something about it is a way for all of us to be closer and to not feel quite as alone in some of the things that we have to go through on our own or with our family.
Well, in the beginning, we had mentioned the Prickly Pear Poetry Project, and Tammy Trex and I, in the workshop, we're working with anybody who's been affected by cancer. And in those workshops, it's stunning, the insights that people have, the work that they produce, the thought, and it's always so moving. And the idea behind it is not to create, absolute art, but it's to help process the experience. And it's just every single time we're there, it's so moving.
Well, I think that's a wonderful and important project. And I can say from my own work, whenever we look at something that's important or painful, to try to talk about it or write about it allows us to see it in a different way. And that gives us freedom to encapsulate it either within the work or within the period of the life, or to work on it another way. I think it's really important to do. And you've done a lot of good work around that. I really felt deeply moved by the poems and felt connected. Thank you.
No, thank you, Maudelle.
Of course. I think one of the things I have been talking about very often with my contemporaries are the received forms that come down to us from poets in the past, and what that line of forms means to us in our work. Some of the received forms are sonnet. There are many that are not just in the Western tradition. Their traditions. However, sonnets are probably, for the Western folks, the most ubiquitous and well-known, if we don't count limericks. And I think in this case we shouldn't.
Yeah, let's not go there.
I noticed that many of your poems have a skeleton of forms, and some, in fact, are more rigorous in terms of sonnets. You have a couple of really nice Shakespearean or English sonnets in there. And I wondered why you chose that particular form that you did, and how it lent, what it lent to your work, and how it moved you forward.
Well, I love sonnets. They're a mini argument in a little box. For people that don't know what a sonnet is, it's iambic pentameter, 14 lines, rhymes. I don't know if that actually helped, but and so, but within it, there is always this argument and a turn and a surprising conclusion, or something that brings it together in the couplet. I was trained very hard in this sonnet. Bob Crawford taught me everything I know about the sonnet. And, you know, he would, it's definitely, there's no slant rhymes in those. But I do cheat now. And I like to adapt. I like to try new things. But the Shakespearean sonnet is definitely my favorite still. And I love sonnets. I mean, in the book, you're going to find a lot of different forms along with free verse. There's sonnets and blank verse, and there's an abecedarian, there's syllabics. So there's a lot of different things, as well as some forms that I kind of play with that aren't formal. I guess I don't know, they're not nonce forms. But you know, my real love comes back to the sonnet. And I do feel like an outlier sometimes because I love free verse as fiercely as I love form. And I feel like, you know, maybe it's starting to, there are more poets that are kind of exploring both now. You know, you have Terrence Hayes with his American sonnets. Meg Carney, who's an amazing free verse poet, just came out with this gorgeous crown of sonnets with the ice storm. So there's more crossover now. So I love that.
Patricia Smith also has a wonderful.
Yeah, I'm actually, don't tell my husband, but her book is on the way.
Oh, so that's fantastic. You guys check out the Frost Place. She read it for us. The first time she read it live was at the Frost Place, and we have it recorded.
Oh,
one of the sonnet is really considered to be the first humanist poem. All the pressure from the outside world, it's akin to our own skull if we imagine ourselves in there. And it really ties us to other poems. Do you find it freeing to work within the rules?
I absolutely do. I know a lot of people say, oh, it's so limiting. You have to you stick within this box. But what it does is it forces you to think in new ways that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. You know, if your rhymes aren't working, for example, you might have to throw out your whole stanza and start again, but it's pressuring you to look at things in a new way. And there are always surprises, wonderful surprises that come out of it. And that's what I love. And I mean, I'll a lot of times, actually, I remember Linda Paston said this a while ago about how sometimes if she's feeling dry and nothing's coming, she'll try a form and then it'll kickstart her writing. And I think that happens for me all the time. I'll try a form. Sometimes I'll actually go back and edit it down and it'll become free verse again, but it starts as form. It just kind of, every poem calls for something different. And I think when you're talking about form, it's important to remember that you want your form to have a function. So why are you picking that form? If your subject matter is repetitive, for example, you want to go with something like a villanelle that has a repeating pattern to it, as we talked about with the sonnet, that argument format. So form and function are intertwined.
And it also gives you something to push against. If you decide to deny the form for specific, whether it's denied in rhyme or you do substitutions, it gives you something to really change against. I notice that you make a lot of those moves. So if you really want to get down and dirty, you can dig deeply into Kyle's sonnets and see what she's doing with rhythm and with initial trochaic substitution and a couple of other things. But I don't think you'll need to do that to appreciate some of these poems. Kyle, would you read some sonnets for us?
Sure. I'm going to read two. The first is a traditional Shakespearean sonnet. And the second one is a unrhymed sonnet. And you can debate that later, whether or not it's truly a sonnet, I know. Okay. Sin. At 8 years old, I dodged the sister's eyes, ate my sandwich, then donned a saintly face, walked out the gate, past church, and up the rise toward Horn's Variety, that mythic place. The path was new to me. I walked alone and genuflected to inspect a sheared off branch, a mica fleck, a swallow's bone. I used a stick to write, "Damn hell," then cleared away the words. Dust pleated in my skirt. I felt a breath unloosen in my chest, expanding, fearless in this wondrous dirt of disobedience, this fresh unrest. The church bells rang. I rose, denied the call, picked freedom, sin, a red-hot fireball. God looks down at 3 a.m. Good, you are awake. Your eyes blink like stars. Millions of eyes, lit, unlit, open, close, brooding and bright-eyed in your lonely beds. Dark sky of worry up and down the streets. Concerns at this house, children, money, love. At the house next door, cancer, money, war. War, death, koalas, divorce, war, taxes, starry, starry night. My flock, please listen. Fret well, gnash your teeth, chew your inner cheek. This world is pain. Do I have to say it? Who created it? Think hard about that. You lie, false corpses, arms, fallen soldiers. I see you are tired. Me too. Exhausted. The sky is fire. I will try again.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
As you were reading, I saw these amazing recommendations for different crowns of sonnets to read from the folks that are joining us. I'm so glad that we're going to be able to take a look at those and see all of the different sonnets, and that your work is somehow joined to those through form. It's really interesting, I think.
Oh, good. I can't wait to see those.
Yeah, they look great. The sonnets, it's traditionally been sort of a Western form, and forms themselves, once they're received, they come from places that are not always great to visit, but pushing back against that form and having the form sort of, if it's patriarchal, for example, you can use it in a different way.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Makes the poems themselves. There's some wonderful essays about reclaiming the forms and taking a look at those forms rather than receiving them as they're given, but reclaiming them and using them for the purposes of the non-colonialists and everyone else. And I think it's really refreshing to see those sonnets and to use them for not exactly feminist poems, but with a female bent and something that they weren't intended for. It adds a little bit more tension, I think. Did you find that when you were writing them?
I don't know if I felt the tension of it because I feel like I'm just trying to, in some poems, I'm trying to play with it in ways that are going to push back against it. In other poems, I'm not. But I think in Sin, it's kind of a chuckle to have it be a perfect sonnet. Well, I don't mean not to say it's perfect, but I mean in a Shakespearean sonnet form, because it's talking about kind of restriction and things like that. Although in the end it's loosened up, but is it? So it's kind of fun to play with it, and I think that's what the beauty of form is. And to your point, I mean, I love that today there are these new creative forms like Jericho Brown's duplex. I tried one of those recently, and it's great to see new forms coming and what is being created.
Yeah, and Alpha Weaver has done the bop.
Oh,
amazing! There are so many amazing forms. The form. So Hollander said that if the saxophone is the instrument of particular solos, then the human imagination is the instrument of poetry. If we say that the human imagination exists within those forms become a type of place, I think, and a type of tie to us, that it's as if the poem itself is in situ, inside this box that has been defined by someone else. I noticed that there are very strong elements of place in your book as well. And that place, if we tie it together with the internal changing that comes with cancer, and then the external forces that come with inhabiting the received forms, having place be as organic and comprehensive as it is in your work, it's really interesting because you have all three of those models evinced. Can you tell me just a little bit about how place changes what you're writing about and influences your art?
Yeah, and what you just said is it's so compelling, and I need to really think about that because it's such a great way to look at it. For me, yeah, I mean, in the book, you're going to see a lot of places that I don't know, places. I get a very strong attachment to places. So there are a bunch of New York City poems in there where I spent a lot of time in my youth. There's the lake up here where I am now. There, different travels, and these places, these images, they're almost like characters, and they stick in my brain until I try to figure out what they're trying to say. And then they'll come out in a poem. So, I mean, and they go back, a lot of these, in terms of the idea. I mean, one poem mentions Thailand, where I was as an exchange student in high school. And yet there was something about this floating nun that just stood, kept coming back to me over my whole life. And one of the poems I'm going to read for you now takes place in Rouen, France, where I was an exchange student or did my junior abroad in college. And, it just kind of stayed with me. It's about an hour outside of Paris. It's in Normandy, and it's known for a couple things. It's known for, Monet painted his cathedrals there. There's this beautiful Middle Ages area with the half-timbered buildings. The plague went through there in the Middle Ages and really decimated it. And then it's also the place where Joan of Arc was burned at the stake. So all these things kept just sticking in my brain, and I finally came out with this poem. The window of Joan of Arc talks to the window of Saint Anne. And I'm sorry, I should tell you that. So Saint Anne is the mother of Mary, mother of Jesus. So Saint Anne is the mother of Mary. The window of Joan of Arc talks to the window of Saint Anne. Rouen, France. Once we were women, now we are stained window panes, crimson blood, blue fire. We flash in the morning sun. Come, let's descend, faire la bise like friends, kiss one cheek, then turn the other. I'll carry your basket to the marché, gather berries and greens, camembert and cider. We'll talk of God and grief. I burn with your loss. Before my time, after yours, the black shade was drawn. Tumors, spots, pus. Even a cat buried alive in the walls could not stop the onslaught. Listen to the crunch of bones beneath our feet. Oh plague, oh war, oh torment of innocence. In this flesh, I am not strong enough to survive more rising smoke. Are you? Now, so this is a little more expansive in terms of place, but in my poems too, I find small places. Small is kind of a theme in there as well. And I'm going to read you, I call it sometimes my Ars Poetica. It's about, it takes place in a naughty chair, which is akin to, I guess, a timeout, going into timeout now. And I guess my brother and I were really close in age, and when we were really small, we'd get into a lot of trouble. So I found myself in the naughty chair a lot. And I'm sure I was only there for like 5 minutes, maybe 10, but it felt like hours. But I kind of liked it. I just would sit there and think. And so that's why I became a poet, I think. Lesson from the naughty chair. Stay there until you're sorry. And you were never sorry. So you sat with your deeds in the corner, crushing the velvet one way and the next, never examining your naughty, nail etching lines in the forgiving fabric, blue as heaven, blue as sea, blue as the rug beckoning, legs dangling long minutes above the blue. Don't touch the floor until you think about what you have done. What have you done? You think, this chair is pretty. You are sorry now.
That's really wonderful.
Thank you.
It seems to, oh, pardon me.
Oh, go ahead.
It seems to me that sort of in this primordial stew of history and the individual and form, you're able to weave that into something within your own sort of fully, you're inhabiting what is coming down, inhabiting the place, inhabiting the body, and inhabiting the form. Would you say that that ties everything together?
Yeah, I think you said it really well, and that does, and probably more than I ever would have said it myself. I think you just encapsulated it there, so thank you. And I think, there all these different ties, they come together, as you know, when you're writing, and sometimes these themes or these threads are visible to you, and sometimes they're not. They're almost there without you realizing it's a subconscious thing, right? And it can create probably better things than you ever would have done if you were consciously trying to do it.
I think that's really a nice way to put it. If you think about a cook trying to discern what ingredients are in something, sometimes they're able to do it and sometimes they're not. There's the sum of the whole doesn't equal the total. And I think that's a very good way to look at the book and to look at what you're doing, is that the fully realized pieces within the book rise up and become another narrative, which is one of the things I enjoyed the most.
Oh, that's, well, again, to my, Linda Paston, who, again, I listen to everything she says and what she does. And I remember her telling me once about this idea that the book needs to be a whole, like a whole new, it brings everything together. It's a new work. It's not just the individual poems anymore. So yeah, thank you for saying that.
Well, it makes it a totally different thing. And I think that's one of the most enjoyable things about a collection of poetry. We've been very lucky to hear you read from that collection tonight, but I don't think Lucid can be fully experienced until you have the book in your hands and you're able to read it through, to have the arcs within the poems themselves, the different images and tropes, and the figures that build and leap between the sections. It works so well as a full book. I found it absolutely immersive.
Thank you, Maudelle. I wasn't originally going to add this next poem in, but you had mentioned it earlier. And as I was thinking about it, there's been so much happening in the last year. It's been a long year. It's been a difficult year. And I wanted to leave you, I'm not going yet, sorry. But I wanted to offer you something that would be hopeful. So here's a little bonus poem. Adopt the world. Stop at last to examine the heavy bark, the branch that leaves should burst from, a sister throwing open the front door. Don't turn away. Kneel where you are. Count each toe of grass, lilacs to your chest, scent of infant skin. Dig deep for roots. Pack dirt under your nails. Hoard it like birthday cake. So I'm going to read the last poem for this section. There'll be a Q&A after. If anybody has any questions, put them in the chat. But Maudelle, thank you so much for being here, for all your insights. You're phenomenal. Thank you again to Hobblebush for making all of this possible. And thank you, Gibson's, a stunning place to wander if you're there in Concord, New Hampshire. Thank you so much. And mostly to all of you, thank you for being here and making this a really fun night. And one more shout out to Brenda Wilbert for her gorgeous artwork that graces the cover and inspired this next poem called Loosen. Loosen. For years, I suffer snarls in my expensive necklace. I wear these knots daily. On a city street, a self-proclaimed shaman stops a woman. You have a knot too tight for me to remove. She opens her wallet to learn more. String around your finger, knotted to remember the thing you can't forget. Reef knot, sheet bend, clove hitch, bowline. Learn to tie and untie each. A doctor closes a wound, sees red and gold above the body. This is good. The young woman will heal. Red-headed woodpeckers, 2, dance around a tree. This means the tree is likely dead, my husband tells me. I picture them holding a garland between their beaks, tying a storybook bow around the trunk. For 30 years, the woman carries the knotted sutures inside her. One day, she realizes they dissolved decades ago. A friend explains how to remove the knots from my silver chain. I choose needles, one point anchoring, another teasing apart the tightness. Reposition, tug, reposition, tug. The knot loosens. So easy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kyle, if any of our audience members who have been listening, and there's been many beautiful comments in the chat sidebar, if anybody has any questions that they would like us to ask Kyle, please do type them in. A question that I have for you, Kyle, is you said that this book was 15 years in the making. What would 15 years ago Kyle think of this collection?
Well, I think when I started out, I was pretty raw. I mean, sonnets would take a year to write. So I think she'd be very happy to know that that time period is sometimes, not always, cut down. So I just feel like I've learned so much and that there's been a real evolution in style. I've had so many through workshops, the powwows and the Heidelberg Poets and Joan Houlihan's workshops, just so much great feedback from everybody. And I feel like it's really helped me to write the poems that I want to write. Back then, I think I knew what I wanted to do, but I couldn't always do it. And I still can't, but I feel like every poem gets me closer to what I'm trying to do.
Cynthia asks, Kyle, can you talk about how you organized the book? I was delighted when I saw that excerpts from the last poem were used to introduce each section.
Yeah, well, believe me when I tell you there were many, many iterations over several years. And, every time I would get feedback, basically rejection, obviously, talking about, send it out. No, it didn't make the cut. I'd look at it again and say, okay, what's wrong with this? I went to a couple Colray manuscript conferences, which were fantastic. Thank you, Joan Houlihan. And she actually had made the suggestion to maybe to come up with some kind of one of the poems as a through line through the book. And I actually thought I would use Going Under, but when I started to look at the poems again, I realized that Loosen was perfect because it really, there was one section that kind of led into cancer. There was another one that led into New York City, and so all these different things in the book, it helped to really shape it.
Can you tell us a little bit about Brenda's painting? I think you mentioned that it inspired one of your poems.
Yeah, so this wonderful project from Alice Fogel brought artists and poets together. And we were allowed to, the poets looked at all these different artists and they were all fantastic. But when I saw Brenda's work, it just jumped out at me and I was like, oh, I love it. And, which is really kind of funny because even though I'm wearing a pink scarf tonight, I'm usually always in black. But I love her bright colors. So then I started researching her a little bit and I saw that she did a lot with art and healing, similar to what we did at the Prickly Pear Poetry Project. So it just seemed like a fit. So I put her down as number one as my choices. And fortunately we were paired up. And so we met, we talked about, just our art, what we're trying to do, what, some themes might be. And then she did the painting first. She let me hang it in my office for a couple months to help this poem kind of come into being. And that's where Loosen came from.
Do you have any advice for aspiring poets?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I'm sure everybody hears it over and over and over, read, read, read. Just read everything you can get your hands on. Find really supportive workshops where you feel like your work is, can kind of go to the next level. People that are really helping you to shape it, who kind of understand what you're trying to do and can give some great input to it. And then just keep writing. That's the main thing is trying new things. Some things work, sometimes they don't, but it might lead you, I find a lot of times like, I'll write a really bad poem. But then I realized like the next one, it was trying to get me to the next one. So that's why we have to always write.
Catherine asks, what motivates you to use form versus free verse with any given poem?
It's hard to really articulate that choice, except that some poems just automatically will come and I'll start writing in free verse. Others, I might have a couple lines and I feel like, well, there's something there, but it's just boring, what I'm doing right there. So I think, well, what kind of form could I put this in? I did one recently. I tried a rhyming haiku and I saw that in Marianne Corbett's book and I'm like, okay, I have this idea. I'm not sure how it's all going to come together. And so I tried the form and it kind of brought these surprises that I didn't know were coming. And I think that's what's important about form. But free verse is form too. It's another tool in the kit. And, you're making these decisions on form all the time with free verse, whether it's a line break or it's how the poem moves across the page. There's so many different things to consider.
You mentioned just now that you'll write a few lines and lose the rest of it, or the rest of it is boring, you said. Does that mean you have a notebook or a pile of pieces of poems, and do you ever come back to them? To fit into other poems, and you say, wait a minute, I had this piece.
Some poets are so good at that, and I'm definitely not, except that now I write on my phone all the time. Like I used to always admire like the young poets, and I'd be like, wow, look at that. And they're reading off their phone, and I really wanted to do that. And I'm like, I can't even see it. But now I find that I love writing on my phone because it's always with me. So even if I have, 10 minutes while I'm waiting for something, I can work on a poem. And I don't have to be like, oh, it's on my computer, or, it's always there. So I don't have, I have a notebook where I write other people's poems, which I found really helpful. So if I see a stunning poem that's really speaking to me, I will handwrite it in my journal, the date, the poet, and I'll write out every single word, all the punctuation. And I find that I notice so many things by doing that. If I was reading it, I wouldn't have realized like, wow, this is one long sentence, one sentence. So that it just helps to really focus in on what other poets are doing, and poets that I admire.
Jimmy asks, can you explain how a duplex works?
Oh, Jimmy. Not right now, but but it's a form that's kind of in between a sonnet and a ghazal and a little blues in there. And it's a terrific form. So I'd be happy to give you all the specific rules once I look them up again.
Well, that sounds like a master class to teach. So,
it's a fantastic, and actually my duplex is in the Hobblebush COVID anthology that just came out, and thank you, Alex Perry, for that, and Hobblebush. So yeah, you can look at the duplex in there, and you'll see all the rules.
Was that COVID spring by any chance?
Yeah, exactly.
Why Gibson's Bookstore happens to carry that.
Oh, you have to check it out.
And we did have an event for that, and you can watch that on our YouTube channel. We put the recording up on our YouTube channel. Speaking of books at Gibson's, this book, Loosen, displayed behind Kyle, is available from Gibson's Bookstore. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Maudelle, for joining in to have this conversation with Kyle. This has been a lovely evening. There's a lot of really, really wonderful comments in our chat sidebar, which I will be saving for you, Kyle, because this is going to warm your heart to see the outpouring of love that has been coming in from your friends and family and fans. Lots of applause. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.